We almost didn't go to our 10-year class reunion. When we first got the invitation, we were excited about seeing our old high school classmates again. We sent in our reservation along with a check and marked the date on the old-fashioned calendar we keep hanging on the kitchen wall. Then fate decided to play a trick on us. Meg had a good-paying job at an up-and-coming technology company. Her income combined with mine from a job at a big accounting firm meant we earned enough to give us a nice middle-class lifestyle. We did, that is, until the company Meg worked for abruptly declared Chapter 11 without even paying its employees their last month's wages. Suddenly, we were caught in a vice grip of a new mortgage on a house we'd stretched to buy in the pricey San Diego market, and 2 student loans we likely wouldn't be able to pay off before our 80s. Overnight, our comfortable lifestyle was transformed into a struggle to keep our financial heads above water. So as the date for the reunion neared, we seriously considered writing off the tickets and staying home. Neither of us wanted to admit to our probably successful classmates that A. Meg was between jobs right now, or B. Meg lost her job and we were currently living on beans and ramen noodles, or C. We might have to sell our house at a loss because we couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. But Meg is a very positive person, one of the things I really love about her. And she convinced me that we could keep any reunion conversations focused on the good old days rather than our uncertain future. Besides, she reminded me, we haven't been able to do anything fun in weeks. It'll be nice to get out of the house at least for one evening. So there we were, pulling up in front of an older Holiday Inn near the highway, hoping to recapture our glory days at our 10th reunion. Once inside, we made our way to the reservation table in the ballroom, conveniently converted from the hotel dining room. The crepe paper and strings of LED lights festooned along the walls were a little tawdry, but who were we to be snobby? "Martin!" came a feminine scream, and then Sandy Mosley was reaching across the table to hug me enthusiastically. "I'm so glad you came," our former class president gushed. "And you too, Megan." She quickly got us signed in and presented us with cheaply printed name tags to wear. "I'll find you later," she yelled as another couple arrived to check in. "We have so much to catch up on." As we walked away from the registration table, Meg looked back askance at Sandy, who was wearing her old cheerleading skirt and sweater. "What was all that about?" she asked, a mix of irritation and jealousy in her voice. "Damned if I know," I swore. I haven't seen or heard from Sandy since we graduated from dear old JFK High. Of course, Meg knew that Sandy and I had dated after Meg and I broke up our senior year. We'd agreed that since we were headed to different colleges, it didn't make sense to stay together our last year in high school. I'd been pretty down about it at the time, but gradually I saw the logic and began to re-engage socially. I dated Sandy our last semester, but it hadn't been anything serious. 2 years later, when Meg transferred to my college, we'd had our own reunion that ultimately led to our marriage. Before Meg could make a snarky comment about Sandy, one of her old girlfriends came over and grabbed her. They wandered off to reminisce, leaving me to my own devices. I went over to the bar table and bought a beer, mentally reminding myself to stretch it out as long as possible. Then I began the process of reuniting with my old classmates. I found the conversations only mildly interesting. Meg and I had been pretty popular back then, so quite a few of the people I saw had been friends. But frankly, after going over the same, "Do you remember when's?" and admiring other people's photos of their kids, of which we had none, thank heavens, the conversation grew fairly boring fairly quickly. In addition, between all the people milling around and the oldies piped in over the sound system, the room was fairly noisy, not really conducive to reconnecting with people. Then something odd happened. Both doors to the ballroom were pushed open and a tall African-American man with a shaved head strode into the room. Once inside, he stopped and began carefully scanning the room arrangement and everyone within. Finally, apparently satisfied, he went back outside and the doors closed. What was that all about? I wondered. Before I could find someone to ask, the ballroom doors opened again, and the big man re-entered. This time, however, he stepped aside to reveal a white guy of average height and appearance. But when I looked closer, I saw he wasn't average at all. From his $200 haircut, professionally bleached teeth, and perfectly tailored Armani suit, I realized this guy had money. He reminded me of a network newsman or a congressman, except for the black Converse All-Stars he wore on his feet. The minute the new guy made his appearance, the drone of the conversation in the room changed to a buzz of excitement. Then Sandy was beside me, gripping my arm tightly. "This is so awesome," she enthused. "He said he might come, but I really didn't believe he would." With that, she dashed toward the newcomer so quickly that the tall bodyguard intervened to make sure she kept a safe distance. Unfazed, Sandy gushed, "Oh, Bernie, I'm so glad you decided to come." Then she turned to the rest of us. "Look, everyone, it's Bernard Mansion. We're so glad you made it. Come on over and let's get you registered." I realized Meg was now beside me, and I turned to her in puzzlement. "Who did she say that was? I don't recognize him." "Don't you remember?" she prodded. "That's Bernie Mansion, Nerdy Bernie. The geeky guy with wild hair and the bad acne? Wow, he's really changed. And it's not just his appearance," Meg went on. "He's our high school's first billionaire." "Nerdy Bernie? You're kidding me." Meg abruptly pinched my arm, shot me a warning look, then peered over my shoulder. When I turned around, the celebrity himself was standing there. "Megan Martin, I'm so glad you're here. It's been a long time." He reached out to squeeze our shoulders. "Listen, I need to see some of the others now, and I've got an announcement to make, but I want to talk to the two of you later. Okay?" Sure, Bernie, whenever you'd like." "Excellent," he smiled, and then turned to plunge into the crowd of classmates clamoring to see the famous man. I turned back to Meg. "What was all that about? Why would Bernie want to talk to us? I don't really remember having much to do with him back when we were in high school." She shook her head. "I have no idea. I tried to be nice to him back then, but he was always so geeky and obsessed with computer games that I just never had anything in common with him." "Yeah, me too. And that horrible acne he had didn't help. I'm going to go talk to some of the other girls to see if I can find out anything else about him." "Okay. I'll probably do the same. Let me know what you come up with." With that, we split up again. As I wandered back through the crowd, I came upon our former class president sipping on a bottle of water. "Hey, Sandy," I called. "What's the story on Bernie? You seem to know a lot about him." She eagerly pulled me to her side as though to impart hush-hush information. "What I heard was that he went off to college at Stanford but dropped out his sophomore year to develop games. You know Spring Sprung? I did a double take. That's a fun game. I've got it on my phone." "Wait, are you telling me that's Bernie's?" She nodded vigorously. "That's right, and he made a fortune off it. There have been several spin-offs, and I think the Cartoon Network developed a kids' show based on it. Anyway," she went on, "he leveraged the Spring Sprung money to develop a role-playing game that became an even bigger hit. 3 years ago, he sold that to Microsoft for several billion. Then he used some of that money to form Electronic Mansion Games, the big video game developer. I read in Wikipedia that EMG's bestseller, Warfares, is the most downloaded game in history. As a result, EMG stock has a current market cap of $157 billion on the Nasdaq. Guess who the majority stockholder is?" I just stood there stunned. Yeah, like everybody else, I'd read about guys like Bezos and Musk and Zuckerberg, but I never expected to come in contact with anyone from that level of the economic stratosphere. And especially not for him to be an old classmate. Sandy squeezed my arm and then hurried off to assume her place of honor beside Mansion. I spotted Meg talking animatedly with some girlfriends, but I decided to leave them be. Looking around the rest of the room, I noticed the big bodyguard standing at parade rest by the entrance. That gave me an idea. After a quick stop at the bar table, I walked over to the big man and extended the glass I'd brought with me. "It's pretty warm in here. I bet you're thirsty." "That's kind of you, but I don't drink when I'm working." "No worries. It's just ice water." He accepted the glass with his left hand, took a small sip, then a large gulp. Afterwards, he extended his right hand. "Very thoughtful of you. I'm Carter Everton, by the way." "No problem. I'm Martin. Martin Campbell," he finished for me. I raised my eyebrows. "How do you know my name?" He gestured at the crowd. "I know everyone's name here. It's part of my research to make sure Mr. Mansion is safe." I stared at him in disbelief. "You researched everyone here?" He nodded. "So, Find any potential threats? I asked flippantly. Sure. You're on my list, for example. What? I'm not. He held up his hand to stop me. Your current financial situation raises a red flag. But I also know you're a law-abiding citizen with a spotless record, so I have you as a low risk. I started to get angry, but caught myself. He was right, at least from his viewpoint. It would be easy to covet Mansion's riches. Maybe in another life I'd be envious enough to try something. But not in this world. I decided to change the subject. Ex-military? I asked. He nodded. Can you talk about it? He shook his head. I figured. So how long have you been working for Mansion? There was no hesitation. 23 months, 29 days, 11 hours, and he checked his watch, 23 minutes. Before I could figure out what to say to that, we heard tapping on a microphone. I turned to see Mansion standing on a chair. Can everyone hear me? He asked. In response to the cheers from the crowd, Bernie cleared his throat. First, I want to salute Sandy Mosley for organizing everything. The crowd dutifully applauded, and a blushing Sandy waved gaily. Having said that, I must say I find our accommodations a bit mundane, especially for such an illustrious group. Accordingly, I've reserved the penthouse floor of the Palais San Diego Hotel, and I want to invite all of you to join me there to continue our revelry. Gasps went up from the crowd, followed by excited conversations. The Palais San Diego was the most expensive hotel in town. But Bernie wasn't finished impressing us. You don't need to worry about transportation. I've engaged a fleet of Ubers to take everyone over to the hotel. You can leave your cars parked here. The Ubers will be available to bring you back whenever you wish. As the babble began to rise again, he hurried on with his closer. I realize, of course, that this change of location may be inconvenient for some of you. Babysitters may need to be extended, other plans rearranged, etc. Therefore, to compensate you for your trouble, every guest who goes to the hotel will overseeing the proceedings impassively. The young woman handed each of us an envelope, and when we checked inside we found a crisp packet of 10 $100 bills. As we hastily tucked the money away, Meg rolled her eyes at me. I read where F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "The rich are different from you and me." I think he was right. I could only nod in agreement. When we walked through the doors to the meeting room, the truth of Fitzgerald's assessment was even more obvious. Gone were the conference tables and office chairs. In their place were small round tables like you'd find in a nightclub, each with sleek chairs positioned around them. The tables in turn were grouped around a dance floor. Behind the dance floor was a small platform on which a jazz trio was performing. Along the walls were sofas and love seats grouped in conversation nooks. Elaborate floral arrangements filled coffee tables, and end tables featured Art Deco-style lamps that gave each nook an intimate feel. All of this luxury was framed by a view of San Diego that wrapped around three sides of the room. In short, the conference room had been transformed into an elegant nightclub, like something out of an old movie. As we stood there trying to take it all in, the music suddenly swelled to a fanfare, and a spotlight picked out Bernie Mansion, following him as he strode to the stage. "Welcome, everyone," his voice boomed out over his lapel mic. "I'm delighted so many of my fellow classmates could come. Please help yourselves to all we have to offer. To my right you'll find an open bar. Our three lovely bartenders." I spotted the girl who had passed out and with that brief announcement, Bernie went on, "Let the reunion continue." He quickly descended from the platform and made his way out the door, with Carter Everton right on his heels. The crowd cheered their thanks. As soon as he was gone, the trio resumed playing and the lighting dimmed. One of the pretty bartenders came over with champagne on a tray. "Compliments of Mr. Mansion," she said, and I gratefully grabbed flutes for Meg and myself. After toasting each other and our host, we made our way over to the windows to admire the lights of the city. From this viewpoint, San Diego looked like a sparkling tiara resting on the shore of the Pacific Ocean. After finishing our glasses, we turned back to our surroundings, admiring the lavishness of the arrangements. "This is turning out to be a fantastic evening," Meg enthused. "I'm so glad we came. The way they've done this place is very romantic." She nudged her hip against me. And when we get home, you're going to enjoy a little extra special romance. Because I'm really getting in the mood, Mr. Campbell. Can't wait, Mrs. Campbell, I replied, squeezing her to me. May I bring you some more champagne to keep you properly motivated? At her nod, I went over to the bar and got us refills. After I returned, Meg suggested we check out the food table. As we got closer, I saw that my initial impression hadn't done the array before us justice. Fruits, crudité, trays of nuts, sliced prime rib, a huge salmon fillet, bowls of shrimp on ice, and much more lay before us. I found myself regretting I'd had a quick bite at home before we left for the reunion. Is that caviar? Meg asked, pointing to a large crystal bowl beside a plate of toast points. Neither of us had ever tried any, so we decided now was our chance. As I swallowed my bite, I looked over at Meg, only to find her staring at me with a questioning look. I made a face and shook my head. I guess I just don't have rich taste buds, I said, and she laughed. Me either, we're just too middle class. On the plus side, isn't caviar supposed to be an aphrodisiac? Because I'm definitely getting in the mood as well. Meg laughed again. I think that's oysters, but it doesn't matter. Between the night and the company, she gave me a meaningful look. It's definitely going to be a good night. Enjoying yourselves? A voice from behind startled us, and when we turned, Bernie was standing there. We hastened to assure him that everything was perfect, and he nodded with a pleased smile. Then his expression grew serious. Let's go somewhere less crowded, so we can talk without being disturbed. He led us over to an alcove appointed like a parlor on one side of the room. When we entered, I noticed Carter Everton take up a position outside to ensure privacy. Bernie looked thoughtfully at each of us, then turned to Meg. Megan, I have a confession to make. When we were in high school, I had the biggest crush on you. I thought you were the most attractive woman I'd ever seen. He took her hand and kissed it. I still do. Meg actually blushed. That's so sweet, Bernie. But he wasn't finished. So now that we're back together, I'd like to make up for lost time. Megan, I want you to spend the night with me. I was stunned. Did he really say that? Did he mean what I think he meant? Of course I'll bring her back to you tomorrow, Martin, he went on calmly. I glanced at Meg for support, then gave Bernie an angry stare. I don't care how nice your little party is, Bernie. You've got a lot of nerve coming on to my wife like that. I turned to her. Come on, Meg, we're leaving. Mansion was unfazed. Hold on, you two. You haven't even heard my proposition yet. Something in his tone made me pause. Of course I wouldn't expect the two of you to accept such a proposal without something in return, he went on. So how does this sound? If Megan agrees to spend the night with me, I'll pay off your student loans. I started to reject him again when the import of what he'd just proposed hit me. That's crazy, I shot back. Do you know how much our loans are? He smiled and gestured to Everton, who handed him an iPad. As a matter of fact, I do. The two of you currently owe a combined total of $77,823.15. How do you know that? Meg demanded. Simple. I do a lot of business with the fine financial institution that holds your notes. Meg grabbed my arm and tugged. Give us a second, Bernie. Stepping away from the billionaire, I rasped angrily to her. You're not seriously considering this, are you? She leaned closer to whisper urgently. Marty, we're in a deep financial hole and you know it. If a miracle doesn't happen, we could lose everything. She nodded toward Bernie. Maybe a miracle just happened. I can't believe you'd consider such a thing. I mean, it's nerdy Bernie, right? Listen, Marty, I love you more than anything, and if you don't want me to do this, I won't. But it's just one night. Think about what it would mean for you and me if I do. I couldn't help remembering the never-ending stress we'd both been under ever since Meg lost her job. We both knew just how close we were to the brink of bankruptcy. Now, with a stroke of his pen, Bernie could make all that go away. Still, what if it's all a scam? What if we go along and he changes his mind? I wouldn't put anything past this guy. She nodded. That's fair, Marty. Let's ask him. We stepped back over to where Mansion was talking with Everton. If we agree, how do we even know you'll keep your word? I demanded. What's to keep you from reneging tomorrow? He smiled and nodded. I can put that fear to rest right now. He made a few gestures with his finger on the iPad, then handed it over to me. Is that your student loan? He asked. I'd stared at that account page for many hours. It was definitely mine. Look at the balance, he instructed. And when I did, I was astounded to see it now read 0. He took the iPad back, switched to another screen, then handed it to Meg. I looked over her shoulder. Her loan balance was now 0 as well. Before I could ask how he'd done that, he anticipated my question. The big financial houses never stop working, Martin, and they're glad to accept a fund transfer from a respected client anytime, day or night. I've kept my word, he said solemnly, taking the iPad back. Your loans are both paid in full. Now that I've fulfilled my part of the bargain, it's your turn. He clasped Meg's hand. Come with me, Megan. We have a lot of catching up to do. Wait a minute, I cried out desperately. I haven't agreed to this. Bernie shot me a contemptuous stare. So you're going to renege on our agreement, Martin? I thought you were an honorable man. I turned pleadingly to Meg, and she gave me a helpless shrug. It's up to you, Marty. What do you want me to do? I felt paralyzed, caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place. I looked in her eyes, asking for forgiveness. Go, I said in a choked voice. It'll be all right. She kissed me, then Bernie was leading her away. When I started to follow, Everton stepped in front of me and shook his head. No, it's between the two of them now. But don't worry, he reassured me. She'll be fine. He won't hurt her. Tomorrow, he'll bring her back to you safe and sound. Then he walked away, while I stood there, wondering what I had done. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but eventually I wandered out to the bar and got myself another drink. Then I walked over to the window and stared out, trying not to think about what had just happened, and what was probably going to happen next. Isn't it great not having those student loans hanging over our heads? I thought to myself. We're saved, financially speaking. Bankruptcy averted, budget back in balance, crisis resolved. But at what cost? Hey, it's no big deal, really. Neither one of us were virgins when we married, so what's one night anyway? Nothing, except it wasn't nothing. How will Meg and I feel tomorrow? I kept going over the negotiation we just conducted. Honestly, it felt like I'd been hustled into a deal I hadn't wanted to make. And of course that was true, except that the offer Mansion had made was just too high to turn down. Then a dark thought struck me. Was I the one who had accepted, or had it been Meg? Could she have wanted this to happen, wanted to try another man? No, that couldn't be true. I knew her better than that. Still, doubt kept eating at me, and when I couldn't fight it any longer, I found myself leaving the nightclub area and walking down the hallway, wondering which way Meg and Bernie had gone. The big double doorway at the end of the corridor seemed the likeliest destination, and when I reached the end, I heard a sound that froze me. Instantly, I recognized it, and that's what I was hearing now. I couldn't believe it. The realization shook me to the core. I wanted to bang on the door and interrupt them. I wanted to beat Mansion to a pulp for violating my wife. Most of all, I wanted to make Meg stop. But what I actually did was to turn and stalk away as quickly as I could so I wouldn't have to listen to my wife enjoying being unfaithful. When I got back to the nightclub, I headed straight for the bar, hoping to forget what I'd heard, or at least drown the ugly thoughts swirling through my head. As I stood there drinking and brooding, it took me a minute to realize that the atmosphere in the room had changed. The jazz trio was gone, and hot dance music was pumping out of the speaker system. The dance floor was now crowded with people moving to the pulsing rhythms. But they weren't just dancing, they were dirty dancing. Couples pressed together, kissing and groping, grinding hotly on each other. Others had abandoned all pretense of dancing and were standing there locked in passionate embraces. Basically, the glamorous night spot now looked more like a swingers club. Just then, a pair of feminine arms wrapped themselves around me from behind. "Marty!" the voice of Sandy Mosley squealed. "I've been looking all over for you. Quick, come with me." By then, I was too out of it to resist, and I let her lead me across the floor to the same area where Meg and I had sold our souls to the devil. Once within, she stared at me intently, and I wasn't sure what was going on. "What is it, Sandy? What did you need me for?" In answer, she flung herself at me, kissing me frantically, clutching me to her. When she came up for air, she pulled back just enough to tear off her cheerleader's sweater and begin unbuttoning my shirt. "What I need is you, Martin," she cried out. "I need you to screw my brains out." "Sandy, Sandy?" I tried to hold her off. "What about your husband?" She snorted. "The last I saw Mac, he was passed out in a corner. But I don't care. It's you I want, Martin, not him. God, I haven't had good times since high school." At that instant, it all hit me. The sound of Meg's passion, I couldn't fight it and I didn't want to. Two can play at that game. "Forget Mac," I growled. "And forget high school. I'm gonna make you feel so good you'll never get over it." She was panting now, and I knew she was ready, but I had other ideas. "I'll show you some good loving," I told myself, but it was Meg, not Sandy, I was thinking about. When her spasms finally ceased, her body went limp and I think she passed out. I was exhausted as well, but I managed to roll off her and make a place for myself beside her. Then, to the sound of Sandy's gentle snoring, I also slipped off to sleep. "You son of a bee!" The angry yell startled me awake, and I desperately sat up, trying to figure out what was happening. But the film over my eyes combined with the daylight and a ferocious hangover made that all but impossible. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice yelled again, and now I was able to recognize Meg. She was standing there with her hands on her hips and a look of rage on her face. "What is going on here?" Meg demanded. "No, don't bother to try to answer. It's obvious you've been screwing that bitch." Now I was angry and defensive. "Well, it's not anything different from what you've been doing," I snapped back. "Oh, really? So what is Sandy doing to help our family? Buying you a new car?" she asked sarcastically. "Come on, you know better than that." "What I don't know is when we agreed to an open marriage." "Get real, Meg. You've been off with—" I didn't want to say his name him all night. "Because we agreed to it." "Yeah, well, I didn't agree for you to have a damn love fest with him. You didn't have to enjoy it so much." Her face grew redder. "Oh, now I understand. You were hoping I'd have a terrible experience so it wouldn't hurt your precious ego." "That's not what I meant. I just didn't expect you to have the best S of your life." "And how do you know what kind of S we had?" she demanded. "Because I walked back there after you two left. I could hear you all the way out in the corridor. You were moaning and groaning like a 2-bit W. "Did you just call me a W?" she demanded, her voice suddenly cold and menacing. I realized I'd overstepped. "No, I didn't mean that. I just—" "Stop right there," she demanded. "I think I have heard just about enough out of you." "No, I have definitely heard way too much out of your hypocritical mouth." With that she turned, strode out of the parlor and headed back down the hall toward the penthouse suite. "Oh, shit, what have I done now?" I moaned to myself. I could only hope Meg would calm down after a while and we could talk things out. In the meantime, Sandy had awakened and was hurriedly trying to get her clothes back on. I spotted a couple of nosy heads peeking around the corner at us, and I decided I'd better get dressed as well. As I was pulling my pants on, Sandy darted for the door. "Thank you," she said in a stage whisper. Then, before slipping into the elevator lobby, she mouthed at me, "Call me." By the time I was dressed and had gone out into the main room, the crowd had really thinned out. There were probably fewer than 30 people left, but those who remained were enjoying what looked to be a delicious brunch. The aromas from the steam tables caused my stomach to protest its long fast, and I quickly filled a plate. While we were eating, Bernie Mansion stepped up on the stage to make an announcement. "I hope all of you had a good time last night and are enjoying the brunch we've arranged for you. After you've finished eating, we'll have Ubers downstairs to take you back to your cars at the Holiday Inn or back home if you don't have a car. But if any of you want to keep partying, I have a special treat for you. You're all invited to join me on my mega yacht in San Diego Bay. I've arranged for speedboats to take you out and bring you back when you're ready to go home tonight. And don't worry about what to wear. We have swimwear in a variety of sizes for everyone. So who wants to take this party offshore?" With that, everyone in the room stood up and cheered, causing Bernie to smile broadly and bow before taking his leave. The last thing I wanted to do was to go watch Mansion flaunt his wealth on board his yacht. What I really wanted was to get with Meg and start trying to mend things between us. Unfortunately, I had no idea where she was. I tried calling, but her cell was switched off. Maybe she'd gone home, but I doubted it. Morosely, I wandered around the room, talking with a few people and hoping to spot my wife. While I was looking for her, the 3 barmaids from the night before came out, wheeling a selection of swimwear for us. We were instructed to pick out something we liked and change in the restrooms. You'll want to wear them out to the yacht so you won't get your other clothes wet. We'll take care of them and have them ready for you when you're ready to leave. I grabbed a pair of board shorts and changed in one of the men's room stalls. Then I left my clothes, phone and wallet with one of the girls. Despite my gloomy mood, I had to shake my head in admiration. Whoever did the planning for Bernie's shindig seemed to have thought of everything. Truthfully, it seemed like overkill for a high school reunion, even for a billionaire. Soon we were being escorted down the elevators to the cars that would take us to the wharf. I hung around till the end to see if I could find Meg. Instead, it was Carter who found me. If you want to see your wife, you better get out to the yacht. She's already left with Mansion. That hit me hard. Maybe I should just leave her with him, I said sulkily. Don't be an idiot, he snapped at me. If you want her back, go after her. His words stung, but I knew he was right. I didn't want to let my hurt pride make things worse than they already were. I quickly got in an Uber, and Carter and I caught the last boat out to Bernie's floating palace. Mansion had named his yacht Games at Sea, and it was truly impressive. It gleamed in the sunlight from a distance, and as we neared the boat, it just kept getting larger and larger. When I asked Carter how big it was, he shrugged and told me, a little over 300 feet long, give or take. I couldn't help wonder how much something like that must cost. As we pulled up to the garage at the yacht's stern, I spotted Meg on the bridge deck, standing beside Mansion as he pointed out some landmark. I could only gape at her. She had on a zebra print bikini that was smaller than anything I'd ever seen her wear. I bet he picked it out for her, I thought bitterly. Then a more painful idea hit me. What if she picked it out for him? I waved and shouted to get her attention, but she either didn't hear me or was ignoring me. A moment later, the two of them strolled forward and out of sight. A deckhand was gesturing impatiently for me to board, so I took his hand and let him help me up. Immediately I set out, looking for a companionway to the upper decks. I found one and made it up 2 decks before a crewman stopped me. No higher, he said firmly. No guests beyond here. But my wife is a guest, and I saw her on the bridge with Mr. Mansion. No guests beyond here, he repeated, crossing his arms and taking a step towards me. Standing on the companionway looking up, I knew I had no chance of making it past him. Besides, starting a fistfight on Mansion's yacht didn't seem like a good way to win Meg back. I turned and descended. I'll scope out this floating palace and see if I can't find some other way to sneak up there. When I reached the main deck, it was clear that the party was already back in full swing. People had paired off again, dancing, fondling, and more. The 3 bargirls, each now clad in a tiny white pleated skirt and sailor's blue dress vest, were circulating through the crowd, offering mimosas to the revelers. I was thirsty by then and gladly took one when it was offered. The girl gave me a saucy smile, and when she twirled to replenish her tray, her skirt flew up to reveal tiny multicolored panties. I rolled my eyes. I wonder if Mansion hand-picked them? When I'd finished my drink, I began exploring the yacht. There was a large lounge area on the main deck, and I found more of my classmates there, drinking, talking, and helping themselves from trays filled with hors d'oeuvres. A crew member offered to give us a tour, and a few of us took him up on the opportunity. I was hoping to find another way up to the bridge. Instead, we got a quick look at the engine room below, with its huge twin Caterpillar engines. Then he took us 2 decks up and outside for a lovely view of San Diego gleaming in the afternoon sun. From there, the mate led us to the guest rooms, each of which was large enough for a king-size bed and its own ensuite bathroom. Finally, he unlocked the door to the master suite, which was even larger and more sumptuously decorated. When he operated the motorized curtains, We saw an entire wall of stormproof glass offering an ocean view. But the piece de resistance came when our guide pressed another button on the wall beside the bed. A covering in the tray ceiling overhead began to slide back. In only a few seconds we were staring up through the bottom of a swimming pool on the decks above. At that moment, a woman dove into the pool and began swimming. Although the wave action in the pool distorted our view, I was still able to recognize the zebra print on the swimmer's bikini bottoms. Then a male figure dove in with her. The mate had been talking about some other feature of the owner's suite when he noticed we were all staring upwards. Hastily he closed the cover to protect others' privacy, he explained. After that he led us back to the main lounge, where I quickly grabbed another mimosa and gulped it down, trying to drown my dismay. If I'd had any hopes that Meg would forgive me, that little display in the pool had crushed them. I wandered out to the railing on the deck and stared disconsolately into the distance. When I'd finished my drink, I hurled the mimosa flute into the ocean, childishly pleased at causing Mansion even a minuscule loss. Someone tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned I saw the bargirl. "Hey," she said. "You need to get some sunblock on if you're going to be out here." "Yeah, thanks, but I'm okay," I mumbled, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Come with me," she said, taking my hand and leading me to a smaller cabin I hadn't visited on the tour. "Stretch out there," she directed me to the bed, "and I'll get you all fixed up." I had no will to resist, so I flopped face down while Vicky, as she'd introduced herself, began rubbing lotion onto my back. Her fingers were magical, and I found myself relaxing despite myself. After she'd swung around to lather the backs of my legs, she hopped off just long enough to order me to turn over so she could do my front. When I complied, she crawled back on top of me and began gently rubbing my face. I closed my eyes, enjoying her fingertips. As she moved down to my chest and abs, I opened my eyes, only to see that her vest had disappeared. I was going to say something, but she beat me to it. "A lot of our guests like to get an all-over tan when they're out at sea," she said with a knowing smile. "So we need to make sure you're protected there too." "Oh, look," she said coyly. "I seem to have aroused your attention." When I'd finished and was lying there helplessly, she raised up and smirked at me. "That ought to give you all the protection you need." No sooner had she spoken than the door flew open to reveal Meg, with Bernie standing behind her. "Again? I can't believe this." Meg cried out and turned to flee, but Bernie grabbed her and held her against his chest. Over her shoulder he nodded at Vicky, who quickly gathered her clothes and scooted out the door. I scrambled to pull on my board shorts, all the while trying to say something that would placate my wife. "Listen, it's not what you think." She tricked me. I didn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. "Of course, I get it now," Meg sniped sarcastically. "That 120 pounds. Girl pinned a 185 pounds. Male and forced him to have love with her. It's perfectly obvious. I know it looks bad, Meg, but after I saw you skinny dipping with Bernie, You were spying on us? I need to say something before you two get carried away," Bernie interrupted. "It's been my experience that a cooling off period can help people deal with their issues. So I have a new proposal for you." Both of us turned to stare at him, Meg with surprise, me with suspicion. "It's obvious that you have some big issues in your marriage," he went on. "I think a little separation is just what you need. At the same time, I have to be honest and admit that Megan and I have had a wonderful time together this weekend." She blushed furiously. "And I don't want it to end, especially with you two in such a bad place. So here's my proposal. Now that the reunion is almost over, I'm planning to sail to Hawaii. Megan, I want you to go with me. That'll give us plenty of time to decide how we like being together, and it will give you two the chance to see how well you do being apart. When we get back, Meg can decide who she wants to stay with. What do you think?" "Oh, hell no," I shouted. "That's the same kind of deal that got us into this mess in the first place." He looked at me sanctimoniously. "I'd say that it was your actions, Martin, that caused the conflict you two are going through right now. In any case, you haven't heard the rest of my offer. If you accept the trial separation I'm proposing, I'll pay off your home mortgage." That way, if you two decide to reunite, you'll be completely debt-free. If Meg decides to stay with me, she won't have any financial worries anyway. And, Martin, you'll be starting with a clean financial slate. Either way, both of you win. If that sounds good, I can make it happen right now. What do you say? Despite my anger and resentment, Bernie's offer forced me to stop and think. Our mortgage was just over $700,000. Meg and I had expected to be paying it off until we retired, maybe even longer. Having it paid off now would be life-changing. I glanced over at Meg and saw her eyes were as big as mine. At that moment, Carter Everton appeared at the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Manchin, but your office just called. The Disney people are on the line. They want you to jump on a video call right now. Sparks is setting it up in the conference room on the bridge." Manchin cursed under his breath. "Can't those morons do anything by themselves?" he demanded rhetorically. "All right, Everton, I'll be right there." He turned back to us. "You two think about my offer and let me know what you decide when I get back." The minute he was gone, I started to speak just as Meg did the same thing. We both tried to get the first word in, but a strong voice stopped us. "Be quiet, you two." Carter Everton hadn't left, and now he was staring at us with his arms crossed. We turned to him uncertainly. "Do you know what a cheat code is?" he asked. "What? No, I don't," Meg snapped. "And what does that have to do with anything?" "A cheat code is a hidden command in a video game that gives the player who knows it some form of special advantage." "Okay, so what?" I asked, equally confused. "Manchin loves cheat codes. He writes them into all his games. In fact, some of his games can't be won unless you learn the cheat code. And you know why he loves them? Because he's a cheater. He loves having an unfair advantage over his opponents." "That's pretty sad," I said, "but I still don't see what that has to do with us." Meg had an odd expression on her face. "Are you saying—" "That's right," Carter finished for her. "Manchin doesn't limit cheat codes to his electronic games. He's been using them on you two all weekend." He pointed at Meg. "You know, he had a thing for you back in high school. You ignored him back then, but he wasn't willing to accept your rejection. When he found out about your financial situation, he figured his wealth would give him an unfair advantage to get you away from Martin." I started to speak, but Carter wasn't finished. "That was only the start," he went on, still speaking to Meg. "Once he convinced you to come with him, he wanted to be sure you'd be properly responsive. So to ensure your enthusiasm, he had his bartenders put ecstasy in your drinks. By the time he got you in the penthouse suite, you were, primed. He put X in Meg's drink? That bastard. It wasn't just Meg," Carter went on, turning to me. "He spiked your drinks too." "Me? Why do that?" I asked in confusion. "Meg is who he wants." Carter shook his head. "Getting Meg for a night wasn't his goal. He wants to split you two permanently. He's always resented you because you were the one she chose. He wanted Meg to reject you the way she rejected him back in high school. That's where Sandy Mosley came in." I shook my head in bewilderment. "He knew Sandy had a thing for you, so he spiked her drinks as well to get her libido racing. At the same time, the bartenders put knockout drops in her husband Mac's drink. With Sandy in heat and Mac out of commission, Manchin figured she would try to seduce you. And with you flying on ecstasy, he was pretty sure you wouldn't put up much resistance. After Sandy succeeded, Manchin made sure Meg found out about it." "Sandy seduced you?" Meg asked me in surprise. "I thought you went after her." I decided to be truthful. "She came on to me, Meg, but I guess I didn't resist very hard." She seemed to be reassessing, but then her anger returned. "So what about that little vixen you were with just now?" Carter was exasperated. "Don't you get it? Manchin doesn't just cheat once, he keeps cheating until he wins. Bringing you two out to his yacht gave him more chances to play you." He gestured at Meg. "Once you were here, he made sure there was more ecstasy in your drinks. And it worked. Would you normally be cavorting topless in a swimming pool?" She blushed. "And as for Martin and Vicky, the bar girl you found with him, she was another one of Manchin's cheats. She might look like some random college babe, but Vicky is a high-priced escort assigned to seduce Martin. Given all the ecstasy he had in his system, it wasn't particularly difficult for a pro like her. He pointed at Meg. Did it occur to you to wonder why Mansion brought you down to this room and how you happened to walk in at just the right time? He did so because once Vicky had accomplished her mission, she sent him a signal letting him know she'd succeeded. It was no accident you two caught Martin in the act. And that gave him the opportunity to offer an even bigger incentive, paying off your mortgage, to split you two up long-term. Both Meg and I were growing angrier by the second, but Carter still wasn't done. This weekend wasn't just about you two. Mansion hijacked the reunion because he also wanted to settle a score with the entire class. He's never forgiven them for the way they treated him back then, ostracizing him, making him feel inadequate, calling him Nerdy Bernie. So he set the whole thing up to bring out the worst in them. He lured them in with cash, softened them up with expensive food and drink, and put them in a highly sexualized environment. Then, to ensure total victory, Mansion spiked everyone's drinks with ecstasy, both at the hotel and here on the yacht. As you saw, the whole weekend turned into a drunken orgy. But what you didn't see were the hidden cameras recording everything. Mansion plans to use that footage to ruin reputations, create embarrassment, and wreck marriages. He's even hired a detective agency to monitor everyone who came and let him know how things work out in the days and weeks ahead. I was still trying to comprehend everything I just heard, but Meg was way ahead of me. So this whole reunion, we've all been players trapped in Bernie's little revenge game. Everton nodded solemnly. Okay, then how do we beat him? She demanded. Just because you know what's really been going on, don't think you can win, Everton answered. I'll guarantee you he's got more dirty tricks planned. He just keeps cheating until he wins. There's only one way to beat a cheater like Bernie. Stop playing his game. He can't win if you don't play. And how do we do that? Carter smiled for the first time. If you want to, you can come with me. My contract with Mansion is up today and I want nothing more to do with that man. I'm going to take one of the launches and head for shore. You're welcome to ride with me. But if we quit the game, what happens to everyone else? Everton waved his hand. You two were Mansion's primary target. My guess is that if you drop out, he'll lose interest in your classmates and move on to the next game. Then let's get out of here, I said urgently, and Meg quickly agreed. Carter nodded approvingly. We better get moving before he realizes what we're planning. You two head to the stern where the launch is docked. I'll get your wallets, purse, and phones from security. If you have any clothing or other possessions, leave him. We need to be gone before Mansion gets through with his call. Meg and I turned to each other, and each of us started, I'm sorry. We laughed and fell into each other's arms. As far as I'm concerned, this weekend never happened. I told her, and she nodded her agreement. Then, arm in arm, we hurried astern. A short while later, we were seated in the back of a launch carter was steering toward La Jolla. If Mansion came looking for us, Everton hoped he'd head first for the San Diego Marina. Carter had been thoughtful enough to snatch up a pair of windbreakers, and they helped keep Meg and me warm, but I kept my arm around her anyway. She snuggled tight as we skimmed over the calm Pacific seas. Suddenly, I had a scary thought. Hey, Carter, I called out over the roar of the twin engines. Do you think Mansion will try to undo paying off our college loans when he finds out we're gone? Nope. Once the bank accepts a funds transfer, that transaction is over. Besides, for Mansion to try that would be admitting that he'd lost. He won't ever do that. I felt relief wash over me, and I hugged Meg even tighter. We really were going to be okay. Then I thought about Everton, who'd pulled us back from the brink. What about you, Carter? Are you going to be okay? I'm good, he reassured us. Like I told you, my contract is up and I'm free to go. And I assure you, I can always find work in my line of business. So why did you sign up to work for Mansion in the first place? He looked at me intently over his shoulder. Simple. He offered me the money I needed for my daughter's medical treatment, which cost a small fortune. Now that she's well, I don't need or want anything more to do with him. Meg and I glanced at each other, and we both nodded in sympathy. But as I looked down at her, I again noticed the zebra print bikini she had on under the windbreaker. I couldn't help myself. So, how was Bernie? I mean, it sounded like... She looked at me sharply. He was every bit as good as Sandy. Chastened, I nodded. Right, sorry. This weekend never happened. Okay? It never happened, she agreed. But I do have one suggestion, babe. Yes? She replied cautiously. Let's skip the next high school reunion.